coming back, or being here for the first time, if it's your first time. As I think everyone knows, I'm Jerry's husband, Pastor Brad, Reverend Brad, I guess. I'm not pastoring a church right now. And this is a class kind of looking at where the church is going. If you were here last week, we talked about the technological disruption that has happened and how that transformed the church in the Reformation, and how we're in the midst of that sort of transformation right now. We're actually going to look at some trend lines, some kind of big cultural shifts that have been ongoing, and see how those played out. And though there are three individuals listed here, and we'll talk about the three of them in a little bit, they actually kind of represent not just themselves, but kind of the representative figures of some cultural shifts that have been going on. But before we begin, let's pause for a moment. God, our conversation and our deliberation, be with us, oh God, as we kind of see the church in new ways and see the moment we're living in new ways, and help us to find from this a passion for your church moving forward. In Christ we pray. Amen. Before we talk about these movements, we want to talk, though, about the context in which they happen. And that is the post-World War II United States of America. And I think the best way to kind of grasp with this period, which I'm going to say basically ran from 1945 to 1965, roughly. The best way to kind of grasp with this is to talk about something. The first time I ever talked about this in a sermon, somebody came up to me afterwards and said, "What does that have to do with anything with regard to religion?" And I said, it doesn't really have anything to do with God, but it has a lot to do with who we are and the culture we live in, and how we live impacts how we perceive and represent God. So, in 1945, can anybody give me an estimate of what the gross domestic product of the United States was as a percentage of the gross domestic product of the world? Now that means all of the output, all the services, goods, on a global scale, all of the economic work being done. What percentage of all the economic work being done in 1945 was in the United States? Just take a wild guess.
Does that include military hardware?
Yeah, all of it.
I would say 90%.
Well, not that high.
I'd say 60.
Yeah, it was 50%. One out of every $2 in economic activity in the entire world happened in the United States of America. We were the global superpower, the dominant force. Now, I know we talk about the Soviet Union versus the USA, but from an economic standpoint, there was never a comparison. Our culture became the dominant force in the globe as we became the dominant economic force. In 1985, that's 40 years after World War II ends, the United States is still 35% of all the global economic output in the world. Anybody have a sense of where it might be today? 15%. 15%. So there was a time period at the end of World War II that really kind of shaped our lives as United Methodists in how we did church, right? The United Methodist Church was formed in 1968. It was part of the dominant culture when, for example, we had the mass migration to these new creatures called the suburbs starting in the 1950s. The United Methodists went out, and a lot of our inner city churches moved to suburban settings, or we planted churches in suburban settings. We, along with the other mainline Protestant denominational groups, Lutherans, Episcopalians, all of them, kind of rode the crest of this, so that also during this time period, half of all the people in the United States were members of mainline Protestant Christianity. We were the dominant force in the United States. We were the dominant force on a global scale. That has changed, hasn't it? And today we're going to talk about kind of the movements that were happening, as I said, 1969, 1975, 1978, that all were going, shifting currents that were happening that we, by and large, ignored, missed, weren't paying attention to, and that these are the forces that have shaped so much of what a church looks like these days. They impact, finally, our United Methodist churches. We're seeing some elements of them in our United Methodist churches. And they certainly shape churches like Chapel Point down the street. Or, I'm sorry, the name of the one right across the street.
Fairhaven.
Thank you. Daybreak is across the street from that, right? So let's talk about it. Before we begin, though, do we all sense what I'm trying to go with here? How dominant we were, and how that kind of put us in a comfortable place as United Methodist. I'm curious, when was this, I know it's not an old congregation, when was it formed?
1976.
1976. So you were kind of formed actually by people who come out of this mindset, just as, to be blunt, we were already beginning to shrink. The United Methodist Church was formed in 1968. Do you know what year we had our highest attendance? No, 1964. The two denominations, the Methodist and the EUB, Evangelical United Methodist, or United Brethren, hit their high point in worship attendance in 1964. Our denomination has been in contraction since its formation, because it's a representative structure of post-World War II America, this time period, and has had a hard time shifting away from that over the years. Any questions or comments about how's that feel? Don't just think about it, but kind of feel it. How's that feel to you?
Well, I was serving some churches as a Christian educator back in that early time you're talking about, the 1970s. And that, you know, it's kind of like Field of Dreams. If you build it, they will come.
Yeah.
But ain't that way no more.
Yeah. United Methodism, and again, I'm talking United Methodism, has never been strong on evangelism. Now I'm not talking about our Wesleyan roots like Sherry was preaching on today. Talking about since '68, we've never had great strength in the United States at evangelism. We have overseas. Boy, have we ever. Next week we're going to look at that. But in the United States, basically, we grew because the baby boomer generation was born. And they were raised in these churches. But as the baby boomer generation is shuffling off this mortal coil, there's a different model that has taken over.
But I also think that the church, if you look at those years, was the hub of everything, was the hub of the community. Whether you went to Lutheran, whether you went to Reformed, whether you were Methodist, that was where you went for social gatherings, that's where you went to worship. Nowadays, there are many, many other outlets that can be not necessarily substituted, but there are other outlets that people find what they were looking for in the church.
Yeah, I would say that's slightly different. In pre-World War II United States, we were the hub of the community. In this time period, there was an unspoken truce between the larger culture and the church. The difference is, in pre-World War II, we were the hub, everything happened here. This is where your community was, this is where your life was centered around. In this time period, with, you know, things like suddenly everybody had to have their kid in Little League, or the exploding sports programs in our school system, or any of the, you know, the arrival of the mall. I'm right at that age where, when I was a teenager, hanging out at the mall was it, right? But it was a truce, because by golly, okay, hanging out at the mall might have been cool on Saturday night, but, or Saturday afternoon. But it didn't open until noon on Sunday. And nobody had a sports practice on a Sunday. Right? That world doesn't exist anymore. And so these actually represent how the church is intermixed with the culture in a new way, where it has adopted some cultural components so that it can continue to survive. And I'm not saying these were good adaptations the church took on, as represented by these individuals that we're going to look at, but they are the fact of what has happened. And why a new kind of Christianity or a new type of church has started taking off while we've been in decline. Yeah?
In some ways, though, there was a massive societal change. If you go back to the 1930s, the United States was mostly an agricultural, agrarian economy. And then post-World War II, people started having bigger families, the baby boom, we moved into more communities, and somebody mentioned communities right there. There were all kinds of community clubs, Lions Club, the Rotarians, all of those kinds of things. All of those things have declined.
Yes.
And so it's not just the Methodist Church, it's all churches, it's our society in general. We've become less of a community. And I'm not sure what the reason for that is, but
we're going to talk about one of the key reasons right here. But I would nuance that a little bit differently. A lot of these historic institutions that we identify as the boundaries for community, whether it's the church or the Lions Club or those things, they've all declined. But other structures have come in, and different structures have come in. And we're redefining, culture's undergoing a major redefinition. All you got to do is either go to some local coffee shop during the day and you see people are gathering in community and finding a new way to do community. Or go to a microbrewery, in the evening, and you see people are finding a new way to do community. We were, I don't know where we were, someplace with a family where, I think it was a microbrewery, and they had board games. We broke out in board games and we're playing them together.
They do that here.
Yeah. Yeah.
But pub theology is better.
Pub theology is one of those examples of where we've learned, we've got to, right? We've got to make adaptations. Because I remember not that long ago when one of our young pastors, and I mean 15 years ago, tried to do a pub theology and had a personal visit from the assistant to the bishop saying, not as a United Methodist we do. And that was like 15 years ago. Now we're all having pub theology. All right, let's look at these three trends. Did anybody see the movie Jesus Revolution?
Yes.
Okay, then maybe you are aware of who this guy is. This guy, Larry Norman, is sometimes referred to as the father, and these days actually the grandfather of Christian music, Christian contemporary music. He wrote an album, I'm blanking on the name, I think it was Upon This Rock, that came out in September of 1969. It was the first Christian rock album. If you go on Spotify, you can hear it. That is not an advertisement that it's any good, but it's out there and you can listen to it. It's a style of rock, it's a style of music. It feels a little dated, that's sure. But if you saw the Jesus Revolution movement, if you've ever heard of this guy before, you know a new type of music kind of broke in on the scenes. To give you an example of how significant this change was, does anybody know the great hymn? Who here knows the hymn, How Great Thou Art? Who here likes it? Yeah. Tell me one that song was written? Take a guess, anybody. And you who are going to do a class on United Methodist Hymnody, I probably don't want you to. Just anybody. Long time ago.
In the 40s?
40s. 18 what?
1840.
1840s. 1953. 16 years later, Norman Greenbaum gets a #1 hit called Spirit in the Sky.
Oh.
Do you see how the world shifted so radically? And so the result of this movement is a whole new kind of way of doing worship. Who here has been to Cornerstone for worship or up to chapel? You may not with Sherry's or whatever. Say, oh, I've been to chapel for worship.
How about Res Life?
Resurrection Life, Res Life. What are some of the hallmarks of their worship? How is it different? What?
Praise
Loud.
music. Loud
Actually, loud is a key ingredient.
Entertaining.
Entertainment.
No.
In their own way.
Lights.
What?
Lights.
Light.
Lights.
Lighting.
Oh.
Thinking of how you do
Theatrical.
mood lighting.
Theatrical, I like that.
Yeah, theatrical.
Maybe like a rock concert.
Maybe.
Yeah, that's a good way
What's their sanctuary?
You know when the.
It's like an
Dark.
auditorium.
Yeah,
Very
it's like-
dark with
Well,
artificial.
it's like
lighting.
theater.
A garden.
Like a casino.
Dark like a theater. I'll tell you a funny, just a little funny side on that. Now, some of you know, I established one of these churches down in New Buffalo. So I'm well familiar with it. But during the pandemic, I got on a list, there were a lot of churches scrambling to bring in technology, video, all of that, right, because of the pandemic when we couldn't gather. And so I got on this mailing list, and I would get a kind of an email each week from this organization saying, here's how to manage this technological change and do this and that. And one of the emails, now I'm serving the Holland churches at this point. If you've ever been there, it's that massive pile of bricks and that beautiful brick brown thing, all brown. And one of the things was the background, and this went into the technology, but the video processors, if you have a busy background, it's hard for the video processors to keep up. And so you should have a background that is either all black or like a lilac color, but just solid. And so I was talking to one of my church members today at that time. I said, I just got this in suggesting that we take the bricks behind the sanctuary and we paint them all black, and so that the video processors will work better. And his response was, I'm sure the bishop will find a nice appointment for you somewhere. Oh, okay, well, I wasn't really going to do that, but I mean, it's a very different style.
Well, maybe under theatrical, it's a stage and it's a production.
It's a production.
And then they also lean real heavily on the money aspect.
Some do.
Res Life does.
Yeah, I've not been to Res Life, so.
They're very, they pass buckets.
Yeah.
And then I've been there when they didn't think that was enough and they passed it again.
Oh, but that's an old thing, go back.
It's been a while. It's been a while.
They're not the only ones who've done it.
Yeah, but it's,
Did they
well,
have
I've
18
never been in a Methodist church that's done it.
Oh, sure, like
Oh, yeah.
revival camp meetings.
Yeah, the
Yeah.
camp meeting there, we used, that was
I
part
went to
of
Res
it.
Life once, they try to abduct you too, by the way.
Yeah.
What?
Oh, they have the, where you come forward too, which,
I raised my hand when
you know what I'm,
somebody granted an altar.
the altar call.
Yeah.
Did they have ATM machines so we could?
You know what?
They did.
Not in the
Most-
building, but yeah.
Most of these churches have an ATM.
They probably do now, they didn't then.
Yeah, that's very common. So, I mean, we kind of chuckle about it, but the fundamental nature of worship has radically changed. I get the sense in this room, maybe we don't like that. But how do we deal with it? And how do we navigate a future? To put it bluntly, I lean toward the younger side of the room. I'm not a fan of this. I mean, when I built and helped build the Contemporary Church in New Buffalo, I took a 6-week sabbatical, and the congregation, when I came back, I did a report, and I talked about the 4 Catholic, 1 Orthodox, and 1 Episcopal church I went to worship, and somebody said, you didn't go to a contemporary church? And I said, I understand this is what you want. I understand the world is moving in this direction. That doesn't mean it speaks to my personal spirituality.
Is it a phase?
So there are some who would say it's a phase. There's a wonderful professor at Grove City I've followed for over, I can't think of his Boyd, I think is his last name, for 20 years now. He likes to publish, he's a professor of Christian hymnody, and he's been publishing stuff for over 20 years about how it's a phase. It's finally cooling off, and it never does. But I do find reading this stuff.
But overall, church attendance is declining in spite of all these newer approaches. So there's still something else going on here, I think.
Sure. But let's understand, and we'll look more closely at that next week, that when we say church is declining, charismatic churches are like this, just ever so slightly up. This kind of church is like this. Roman Catholicism is like this. And mainline Protestantism is like that.
And this county is totally different in my perspective, because when you go up the hill, that parking lot is full about 5 times on the weekend.
Yes.
And you go up the hill this way, and those parking lots are full.
And they're building.
And all the
on it.
Bible churches, a lot, that's the only.
So we can say there's an overall decline. Much of that is demographic.
Yeah.
There's a whole new, the coming Christians are not going to look like us. They're going to be people of color, emigres from Africa and South America predominantly, and Asia.
But the churches today are serving a need. Back when I was growing up, we didn't have the alternative churches like the non-denominational churches. You either were Reformed, around here you were either Reformed, Catholic, Lutheran, and Methodist.
Yeah,
And
world's gone.
yeah, but primarily it was Reformed around here. And if you were anything but Reformed, you had your Reformed friends who were like, oh, we have church on Wednesday, why don't you come and join us?
If you ain't Dutch.
You ain't much.
That's right.
But unfortunately, I am one.
Yeah.
I've had this, I've had a conversation, my kids are in their 30s. The youngest is 30, my daughter's 33. You all know the Ames, had this conversation with Emily Ames. And my hairdresser, who happens to be, works in Hudsonville, they go to Res Life. He grew up Baptist, and his kids don't go to church. When they started going to Res Life, his kids said the production for them was cringy. They couldn't stand all of that stuff because it felt very false to them. And that's exactly what I hear from my children, from people like Emily Ames. They all find all of this cringy. It doesn't speak to them in an authentic way. And all of us old people think that's what they want.
Right.
And I think we're really missing the boat there. Because it isn't what they want. It doesn't feel authentic.
Yeah, that's a good point to highlight.
Yeah.
The reason why they're flat and just now beginning to turn down is because this church, this thing that we're describing, is designed for baby boomers. The children of the 60s and the 70s, us. And our children are looking at it and saying, ah, it doesn't mean they're ready to go back here.
Yeah.
It means something new is coming. And by and large, our children are that group that's called the nuns, not N-U-N-S, but N-O-N-E-S. That's why I said the coming church, the United States is in the midst of one of its highest periods of emigration in its history, rivaling like beginning of the 20th century, late 19th century. And those emigres coming from sub-Saharan Africa, Asia, and South America are Christian. There are more Christians, I mean, sometimes it's hard for us to hear this. I was talking to one of the leaders of our conference here in Michigan, the Methodist Conference, and she was lamenting, I just don't know what the future's gonna hold, and I said to her, you know, there are more Christians in the world today than there were yesterday. There really are. Christianity is still in growth mode globally. It's just not mainline Protestantism as we've done it here. Yeah.
I guess this kind of fits in this part of the discussion. I've been a professional Christian United Methodist all my life.
Mm-hmm.
My cousin Bob, who's 5 years younger than I am, his last time he was inside a church was probably 50 years ago, and he is definitely a nun, okay?
Yeah.
The most powerful religious experience I've had in my life, I almost would dare say, was a year ago when my brother gifted me tickets to the Trans-Siberian Orchestra performance here in Grand Rapids.
Yeah.
And I thought, Lynn and I went to it thinking it was something like the Soviet Army band.
It's a great
That's
concert.
how
It's a great
culturally
song.
whatever we are. But it was so powerful, and I think
Yeah.
the lights, I mean,
Yeah.
it was like the light shines in the darkness, and suddenly a solo comes ringing a cappella into the auditorium, "Oh come all you faithful." It was like, wow. And my cousin has the same experience at that thing.
Oh, yeah.
And he's not religious.
Yeah, so let me be clear. Like the loudness, that's intentional. The darkness, the use of light, this is, last week we talked about technological disruptions. There's a reason why this is there. It's not just, well, this feels good. I was at, when we were first give you a little insight to how the church in New Buffalo had to drag me kicking and screaming into contemporary worship. When they would ask about it, I'd say everything sounds like a bad Journey song from the 1970s. But we were kind of learning about it and everything. And we went to a program at Cornerstone that they were doing for the whole conference to learn about these contemporary things. This is 15 years ago now. And at the closing of this day-long event, the band up front said, we're going to do a song now. It's not really a Christian song, but you know, it's got some good things to it. And they started playing the song, "Don't Stop Believing," right? The old Journey song. And I just looked at my congregation and went,
See?
the young man who was leading the band on the stage 5 years later was the worship arts director at the New Buffalo Church. And he took me to a conference where he was saying, trying to explain to me that these tools are about shaping the emotional landscape. That one of the reasons why this works is because it's shaping us emotionally and not just engaging us intellectually. And that speaks to this generation. Now the next generation's got their whole new way of doing it. We're gonna have to figure that out. We were at this conference at the Church of Resurrection about contemporary worship, and they had a singer come on stage, and she was singing solo, and all she had backing her up was the cajon, right, the beatbox drum that you were using today. And they had just very simple lighting, and he took me to the side of this massive congregation, and they had these simple white lights that would periodically sweep from the floor up to the people, pause for a moment, and up like this. And he took me to the side, and he said, watch what happens when the lights sweep. It was one of the most jaw-dropping moments I've ever had related to church. Every time the light would sweep across people and then go up, the whole group, you could watch rows of people just lean in. The light was drawing them in. That light show was designed to do that, have an emotional impact. Yeah.
Cool.
Well, what is it? Is it?
Occultism.
Some of what we do has an emotional impact to us, doesn't it?
Yeah.
When we say I mean, there are people who could say, when we say the Lord's Prayer and we all use the exact same words in rhythm together, that's got kind of a feel to it, right? That's the stressor on this. We do things that feel good to us. These are connecting in a different way. Someone over here had their hand up,
Yeah, Leonard Sweet
yeah.
had some interesting observations that some of which we touched on, although he puts a different label on them. He says that one of the reasons the church is in trouble today is because people yearn for participation rather than observation.
Yes.
They
Yes.
yearn for experience rather than dogma.
Yes.
They hunger for community, not institutionalization.
Yes, exactly right.
And this was brought home
And
to
he's
me
describing
by
baby
two
boomers perfectly.
friends of mine. One who is, both are longtime friends. One's a Quaker and one's an evangelical Christian.
Right.
And they both said to me in separate conversations, I don't want to talk about God, I want to experience God. Now, for the Quaker, that means sitting quietly and sensing the presence of the Spirit. For the evangelical, jumping up and down, yelling, singing, and hollering. But they both see that as experiencing God in a way that means something to them.
Read the lyrics of the old 18th century and 19th century hymns, and they're about God. Read the lyrics of contemporary Christian, and it's to God. Right? What you've done for me, who you are to me. Yeah, it's about the experience. Larry Norman was a rock and roll wannabe, did okay, had some kind of mid songs. Then in LA in 1968, he had a spiritual experience that was personally transformative, and personal experience music flowed into his music. Bill Hybels was a business major at Hope College in Holland, Michigan. Had a personal experience of Jesus Christ, as he said it. Transferred to Trinity over in the Chicago suburbs, a Christian college there, and became a major in biblical studies, got a bachelor's degree in biblical studies. Never went to seminary, never did anything like that. But then he went on and he founded a youth group in the Park Ridge area outside of Chicago. And his approach to developing this youth group was to go out and do marketing. Did market test surveys. What are you looking for your teenage children? Teenagers going into school. What are the activities and the things that would be meaningful for you as a person? He took his almost business degree, never got it, but he almost got there. And all the things he had learned from his business background and from his family. His family in the Kalamazoo area had their own business. His father was an entrepreneur, and so he had an entrepreneurial background. And he brought business models and business leadership models into the church and founded Willow Creek in 1975 over in the Chicago suburbs. Still one of the largest churches in the United States. And also, beginning in the 80s, established what they called the Leadership Summit, which was about, and I've been to the Leadership Summit a couple of times, which was about training clergy, not any denomination, anyone who would want to come, Their speakers, 2 days long, would be a combination of business leaders talking about management and leadership skills, and leaders of successful ministries who would talk about the management and business practices that they put in place to achieve success in their ministries. And the summit, I mean, Bill Hybels is gone, but the summit is ongoing, and it's something churches do every year in the spring, and they'll have thousands of sites across the country. So that was the next thing, a model of, and it's still our model, right? We've got our committees, we've got our structure, we've got our institution, we have 5 layers of governance in the United Methodist Church. We've got a general conference, a jurisdictional conference, our annual conference, our district, and our local church. I mean, we've got it all. And these baby boomers, we're the first anti-establishment types. That's not what we're looking for. And that's not what, if you go to Willow Creek or one of these churches, that's not what it's struck here. And have we begun to adapt? Sure. Now we talk about, board governance. This is a board governance church here. But understand you're adapting something 50 years after it already taken hold someplace else. Comments? Sometimes I think to myself, the world changed out from under our feet and we didn't even notice. Does it feel that way? That's how it sometimes feels to me. I went to one of these leadership summits. You could go either in person to Willow Creek Church, or they had satellite sites where you could go and watch them on a video screen. I went to Granger Community Church. Anybody ever hear of Granger Community Church? It's a mega church in the South Bend area. Started United Methodist. They're one of the ones who's disaffiliated and is no longer United Methodist. And I went there a couple of times with members of the congregation I was serving. And the first time I went, one of the things I had to do was just sort of tour this church. And some of the things you first notice, and see, tell me if this sounds familiar to any churches you might know of. There's no steeple. It's flat roof. If you didn't know any better, you'd think you were driving by a school building. Does that sound familiar on the outside? That's not an accident. It looks like a professional building. Then you go inside, right? And you're in this massive space. I think if you were here last year, the architect, when we built the New Buffalo Church, said your sanctuary is not the center of your church. It's the place where people can gather that's the heart of your church. So you go into this massive gathering place. And they've got what I think is absolutely the coolest way of dealing with getting kids into Sunday school, which occurs during worship. Prior to the adults going into worship, it's 2 floors, a walk-in and walk-out lower floor, but you kind of walk in on the top floor. And the kids run around the sanctuary space. There are slides. And you find your age level. I'm in 4th grade. You run to the 4th grade slide. It's a tube slide. It's not an open slide. And you go down the slide and you land on a bunch of pillows in your classroom. How do you think kids like that? That's marketing. They brought a marketer in to tell them how to do that. And that built a church. Go to Cornerstone's Sunday school wing, and you'll see that every Sunday school class has a little mini door this big for the kids to go through. They were just copying what worked so well at Granger Community. So I'm taking the tour, and I'm walking around the Sunday school wing, and I mean, it's just, everything is just pristine and perfect, and it's the sort of thing that, oh yeah, this is obviously going to attract the parents. Even where they chose to locate the building, they did studies on where the new housing was going to go up, and that's where they put their building. I'm walking around, and I come to the place where they don't put them down a slide, but the nursery where the little ones go. And as I approach it, I see this massive, I mean, it's as big as this table in size, massive aquarium with fish, and it's not, it's a saltwater fish aquarium, just beautiful, gorgeous. gorgeous. And I'm looking at this, and the woman who's giving the tour goes, what do you think? I said, it's beautiful, the fish are beautiful. And she said, I wonder why it's there. And I thought for a moment. And I said, this isn't here by accident. She said, no. Where do you see aquariums like that? And I thought, our pediatrician's office, our dentist's office, they put that there to send an unspoken signal about how professional and how they were going to care for your kid. So, bringing marketing, business, all of that in, the music and worship style, bringing in marketing. And here's the next one. This guy is not a pastor, he's not a theologian. This is the other hallmark of modern Christianity in the United States. We've described two. Give me a third one that is kind of a hallmark of public Christianity in the United States. Just off the top of your head.
Rob Bell.
What?
Rob Bell.
Rob Bell, okay.
Or Joel
He's the
Osteen.
Mars Hill. But kind of part of what's in the culture of blue when people think about Christians.
My son listens to Joel Osteen all the time.
Joel Osteen, yeah. Are we politically neutral? No. Now, I suspect the folks, by and large, in this church do not align with a particular form of politics that's extreme one way or the other. But in the public imagination, is Christianity aligned with liberalism or conservatism?
Conservative.
In 1971, Christianity Today gathered a group of leading evangelical theologians. Roe v. Wade and abortion had just been bubbling through the political community. And they got these evangelical theologians together and asked them, what should an evangelical Christian believe about abortion? 1971. They had this seminar for a few days, and they put out this paper so evangelicals would know where they should stand on abortion. What do you think they said in that paper? They said, people of good conscience can disagree on this, and that the Bible is silent on this. 1971. That's not how it stayed. This guy, Paul Weyrich, was a Republican political operative. And he saw the Republican Party in the mid-70s in the wilderness because of the whole thing with Watergate and Richard Nixon. And he began casting around to find some sort of political topic that would ignite evangelical Christians so that they would swing Republican, because up until then, your political identity and your religious identity were not in line. Jimmy Carter was a Southern Baptist, peanut farmer and Sunday school teacher.
Kelly got kicked out.
Right. He got kicked out because in 1978, in his papers, he said, I found it. After doing enough studies, he said, abortion is it. So Jerry Falwell, right, the moral majority, everybody here is familiar with Jerry Falwell? Jerry Falwell doesn't preach his first sermon on abortion until 1978 because Paul Weyrich gathers a bunch of evangelical leaders and says, this will ignite the party, we'll get conservatives, and we can begin, from your standpoint, re-Christianizing the United States, and from my standpoint, expand the Republican Party. What happened in 1980? Moral majority helped elect Ronald Reagan.
Yep.
And everything that we think about politics and religion is rooted in this moment.
Well, they were back
Graham. He stayed out of it. Even when they approached him, he said, that's not my concern. Dr. Dobson, 1978, he got on board with this, was silent on it until then.
Well, I didn't mean necessarily abortion, but
Yeah.
the political party.
Politics and religion was born out of a political consultant understanding that he could use a certain social issue as a wedge to drive people into his party, because he saw evangelical Christianity as this great untapped base for growth. And he wrote about it. And his papers, he spells all this stuff out. Just Google him, do a little search on the Wayland paper, or Wayridge papers. You'll see it all. It's all right there. And so the form of Christianity that we see typically up the street, or up the street this way, with its music and its sense of marketing and the type of buildings they have, and where they are, as we know all too well in this county, politically, all has very clear roots that was a response to this, normalizing post-World War II period. And our challenge is to understand we can't go back here. But there's good news. This isn't working for our kids either. Oh, some elements of it are. I think we're always going to have a level of the music. The politics are not aligning. Some of the marketing pieces will always work. Where are you going to plant a church? Sherry and I live up in Allendale, and you go on the outside of town, there's a church called Lighthouse, a non-denominational church. It was just getting started. They had built the first building when we moved in 6.5 years ago, 7 years ago. They're on their third phase of the building. Flat roof, driving by it, you'd think you were going by a school. What are your thoughts? What are your questions?
Well,
Yeah.
it seems to me, that a lot of this stuff, especially there's a lot of entertainment, and there's a massive seeking of our population for entertainment, various kinds and all that kind of stuff. But and when you're talking about, high school kids and the younger generation, that's where you gotta get them right there.
That's part of it.
Mhm.
Held up his phone. Yeah.
Mhm.
But see, our kids and our grandkids differ, because our kids go to this mega church,
Mhm.
and when we go see them, the grandkids, or they come to see us, we want to go to your church. We like the hymns.
Mhm.
And so they're like the grandkids are in their 20s and
Mhm.
younger,
Yeah.
and the adults are in
There
their
are some
30s.
elements of what some of the millennial and I forget what they call it.
Gen X?
No, the generation after the millennials. Gen Z.
Gen Z.
Some elements that I think will be comfortable to us. A much more broader eclectic interest in music. High emphasis on community. Hungry, desperately hungry for authentic community. And a powerful sense of social justice.
Yeah.
I totally agree with that. My daughter just graduated from Ferris this past April, and for the past 4 years, she went to the Wesley House up in Big Rapids. She found her community, she found her spiritual wanting, she found what she was looking for. And during that 4 years, she also attended Big Rapids First. And I have to say, I have nothing but great things to say to keep her on what I think is the right path. And today, she craves for that young adult ministry, I think. And I know she's wanting it, but I don't know where she can find it here. But she's attending, and as a matter of fact, she's still a member up at Big Rapids First.
Good.
So, and that was Wesley House. Wesley House is a small community, and that's what she likes. She did go to Res Life up there, and she says, I didn't like it at all.
Yeah. This is, again, this was designed for us. Now it's what's coming next, yeah.
I'm concerned that with these kids, you hear people complain all the time about, I mean, it's just old people, old people always say, oh, these younger generations. Right, kids today. Here's what I see. Kids who are more engaged in social justice issues,
They are.
and they have a global worldview. They are so much smarter than us, we should all just shut our mouths and go sit down. They are smarter, they are more compassionate, they are better informed. They're better informed through means that all of us are uncomfortable with, but they are better informed. And they are not gonna put up with a lot of the BS they keep getting fed
That's right.
by the
That is
government,
right.
by the structures, by all of that. So what I am thinking about right now is, when my children are not attending church, my first grandchild was just born, she will not be christened. So what is it that we all want for them? Why are we so worried about them attending our church?
Right.
We're not meeting them, we're trying to, for me, it is I want them to have the comfort that I have found in Christ. I want them to have that for their life, because it has been so important to me. But that may be not necessarily their desire, or what they need. So we need to have a different kind of dialogue about how we get, what is this that we're trying to do, quote unquote, for them, or what does religion or faith do for them? It's a very different thing than, people like, we're all roughly the same age. All the women in this room were raised to be good girls. We were raised to be good girls and, follow the rules and go to church and, and we all know the structures. And most of us did it. And our girls are saying, I don't think so. And we raised them. So.
What can we do to resource the faith you want for yourself?
What's happening in the seminaries?
So, I'll answer that in a second, but you see where the emphasis is? Oh, come here and join us. Here's how we do church. We have a resource. We have a building, we have volunteers, we have these assets available to us. How can we put them? On that note, I think it's time for me to be quiet. How can we put them to resource you, to create what you are looking for? And we are America. I know that's how. Real quick question about the seminaries. Just read a piece literally last week. The title of it was "The Baptist One." And it was a piece did you see that piece? It was a piece pointing out the enrollment in seminaries across the United States. In the 25 largest enrolled seminaries in the United States, 23 of the largest enrolled ones are Baptist or evangelical. 2 United Methodist. I'm sorry, 1 United Methodist and 1 Methodist-related Asbury Seminary, which is definitely not United Methodist.
So are they teaching them differently there too, since our society has changed so much?
By and large, they're teaching them how to do this. how to do this. This is how to do church, folks. This is what church looks like. There's a lot more people doing this than there are people doing what we do. And I don't mean by a few. I mean by a multiple of about 5 or 6 times. Yeah.
Our daughter and her family outside of Columbus, Ohio, go to a mega church. But it started out in a business park, and then they built, anyway, we went to this, their dedication, and there was some men there that they introduced that had helped, they did the wiring, they set everything up. And I was talking to one of them afterwards, and I asked him, did you do this, for all kinds of churches? They said, no, only Baptist. But if you ask our daughter, what's your affiliation, we're independent.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I will, we're gonna wrap up now, but we're gonna talk about that next week. The title of next week's topic is Mark Twain Was Right. And that's just a little tease out there. But we're gonna look at the demographic changes and what Christianity both in the United States looks like and where it's headed and what it looks like globally.
Also in today's Grand Rapids Press,
Mhm.
the religious section, front page of that section, there's an article about the decline of the Christian church.
Yeah.
Good article.
Yeah, and boy, I bet on my news feeds, I see it 2-3 times a week about how the Christian church is in decline. There are more Christians in the world today than there were yesterday. There will be more Christians in the world tomorrow than there are today.
So the church is declining, but not the faith.
Church isn't declining either.
She's not here.
It's the
She's not
United
here.
States, and it's a certain brand of Christianity in the United States. And as we look at that next week, we can wrap our heads around that, and then we can start figuring out what it's going to look like, and how do we adapt to what's coming. That's not, and it's not going to be easy. It's just not going to be easy. One thing I'll say is, when I talk about these things, one time somebody said, well, you all just want all of us to turn into these kind of churches. And I said, no. And because they had their moment in the sun, and now their moment is sunsetting. There's a famous story about Harry Truman when he was running for the presidency on his own in 1948. And Thomas Dewey was a Republican candidate. In 46, the Republicans had, first time since the Depression, they had swept back in and taken control of Congress. And a bunch of Democratic leaders in the Democratic Party came to Harry Truman and said, hey, Harry, we know you're a full-throttle Roosevelt Democrat, and you want to back and support all of Roosevelt's programs and everything, but you gotta look at the trends and the demographics and where people are. The Republican Party's on the march, and so you gotta kind of throttle back on your support of all these things. And Truman listened to these party elders and he said, oh, okay, so what you're saying is I should sound more like a Republican. And they basically said, yeah. And he said, pardon my French, why the hell would anybody vote for a Democrat who sounds like a Republican when they can vote for a Republican? We'll never do this, with rare exception. We'll never be able to do that as well as this is not who we are. We have to figure out who we are doesn't work anymore. We can't just say we're going to be this. We got to figure out who we're going to become.
That's true.
And that's the key. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
See you next week.